When I first started composing for orchestra, it was in the concerto form, and I was playing my violin in these pieces. And started in 1990 with the fiddle concerto. The question was, should I compose yet more concertos for orchestra, for violin solo, or should I try my hand at a symphony, which is a real hallmark for any composer. And I tried. I felt like I had enough of my experiences with orchestra to develop my own orchestral language. One of my major artistic concerns from the start of this process of composing the symphony was, will people be interested if I'm not up there playing the fiddle solo in the piece? I didn't know how much of the attraction was about that part of it. And I think along the way that I had more and more feedback from musicians and conductors, as well as audience members, about how they liked the tutti sections of the orchestra, for instance, in my concertos. That would be the part where I wasn't performing. I would just be kind of standing there waiting. By the time I did write this symphony last year, I felt like it was time for me to really be brave, I suppose, step aside and let the musical content speak for itself with the orchestral musicians. The typical symphony structure usually has 4 movements, and then there's different deviations from that throughout the history. For this symphony, I wanted to write a variations symphony, and the subject matter is my Appalachia Waltz theme, a theme that I composed about 15 years ago. And Appalachia Waltz is one of those pieces for me. It was just kind of one of my lucky breaks. I think I had a good 15 or 20 minutes of writing that piece came out of. The variations concept of the symphony really lends itself to multiple variation movements. And I think one of the challenges like a composer has in this situation is to see how varied the movements can be from one another. One of the things that I wanted to explore in my symphonic piece is to really make a very great opportunity for me to explore more of my brass writing and percussion writing. And it just turned out that I came up with kind of like a brass fanfare, an introductory type piece. It's a little bit reminiscent of my own fanfare for the volunteer, where I start off with the brass fanfare and then it gradually segues into the violin solo. Here, it's along kind of the same lines. With the brass and the percussion, I can really create these larger intervals. It sort of sets Americana musically for this piece. I wanted to create the introduction and then start looking at the journey itself, how the westward migration of peoples in America has really been the defining cultural aspect of this country, America. The fugue is something that is a centuries-old classical writing technique. It doesn't really show up a lot in folk music, but I really like to employ it in my own brand of music inspired by the folk traditions. Everybody wanted to be more free, and the different routes that people take, I think I wanted to really almost celebrate and embody in this fugue. Americans felt like being on the move was the best, at least for a long time. And I think our culture and our music is defined by that. When I was going to set out for my symphony in the compositional process, I knew I was going to involve a hoedown at some point in this piece. You know, if I'm going to have that many variations, one's got to be a hoedown. I'm a fiddler, of course. There's got to be some kind of groove to it that feels like it's danceable. And it's hard to corral, 80 musicians, 90 musicians together to create this kind of, almost like hypnotic dance. What I did was I wrote my own hoedown, and I wrote it out of the thematic materials of the Appalachia Waltz. And I just envisioned myself playing in the string section of the orchestra. I wanted really the string section to drive the piece rhythmically, rather than the other way around, rather than necessarily count on the percussion or the brass to provide a forum for the rhythmic energy of the piece. I thought I needed the strings to do that. The strings have the big responsibility in the hoedown. I wanted this hoedown in particular to be one step removed from Appalachia. And I thought about the prairie a lot in the writing of this. The wide open spaces. We're not to the desert yet, but the prairie. The prairie is quintessential Americana. And a lot of this fiddle music was invented from these areas, the prairie areas, the plains, the Texas plains. And so I could just imagine, people like racing across the plains in stagecoaches and horses on their way, to Colorado, or on the way to the West Coast, the gold rush. And so I just thought that the fast music and kicking up the dust and making something of a race towards the finish would be something that the hoedown could really offer up. The fifth movement is called Soaring Eagle, Setting Sun, and it is a canon. And the canon is another form of musical composition that I wanted to employ in my variations. With this piece, I wanted to start very, very softly and very low in the basses, where you could, barely hear them begin the piece. And then the entire movement is one big crescendo up. And it really reminds me of like climbing this almost insurmountable mountain face. So there's something very tragic about this canon. I think it's a dramatic and emotional moment in the journey. As you climb this face, you can almost feel the plodding of the footsteps and the heaviness in the legs as the journey goes. I think that the symphony form is so foreboding that it scares a lot of people away from it. I mean, there's really there's so many forces, but in another way, there's like no place to hide. You can't really hide behind playing techniques or virtuosity, or even performance applications, like wearing a nice suit. Hopefully, you're looking good on stage or something. I mean, there's none of that at play here. It's just about the music and the story that you're creating through these instruments. I wanted to take a long time. I took almost a year to compose this. and I wanted to make sure that I gave it every shot I had. Inevitability in music and being creative is an interesting thing. It just depends on, I think, your life course. You know, like I've always felt like I always took chances. You know, even when I was a kid learning and being in the profession as a young child, always taking chances, never really settling for what came natural to me. It's just part of my journey. It's like I look at that progression as someone maybe, you know, physically taking themselves from Appalachia and going across the plains, going up that mountain face of the Rockies, and heading west to the Pacific and the sunset. A second symphony. I suppose down the line, I think I probably want to let some time go by and see what kind of place the symphony finds out there. And if it finds an audience and musicians are in support of it, then I'll probably hop right back into the ring. I look forward to that.